From time immemorial, the sovereign nations have inhabited, protected, and preserved the land that is so-called Canada. We acknowledge this fact. The land we serve is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, and the Chippewa. Reelworld's offices are in Toronto, which is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2024 Reelworld Film Festival and Summit, and to today's conversation with our 2024 Reelworld Trailblazers. We're very excited to have all 6 of these wonderfully talented people here with us today for a great conversation. So I'm going to do a quick round of introductions. We have with us today Aisling Chin-Yee. Aisling is a producer, writer, and director based in Montreal and Los Angeles. She won the Directors Guild of Canada Award for directorial achievement in a miniseries for the CBC series Plan B in 2023. She also won the DGC Award for Best Editing in Documentary in 2021 for No Ordinary Man. Aisling has also produced critically acclaimed films such as Rhymes for Young Ghouls, The Saver, and Last Woman Standing. Next, we have Anthony Q. Farrell. He's a BAFTA-winning, Emmy-nominated writer-producer. He created CTV's Shelved, Overlord and the Underwoods, and the BBC's Secret Life of Boys. He also was showrunner of Run the Burbs and The Parker Andersons and Amelia Parker. His writing credits also include The Office, The Thundermans, and Little Mosque on the Prairie. Next, we have Omayra Issa. Omayra is an award-winning journalist and anchor at CPAC and a former national reporter for CBC News. She co-produced the groundbreaking series Black on the Prairies, which led to impactful changes in education policies and garnered several RTDNA Canada awards. Fluent in 5 languages, her voice is helping guide national conversations around inclusion and diversity in Canadian newsrooms. Next, we have Zarrar Kahn. Zarrar is a Canadian Pakistani writer, director, and producer whose debut film, In Flames, premiered at the 76th Cannes Film Festival as part of the Director's Fortnight, followed by stops at TIFF and Busan. Born in Karachi and currently based in Toronto, Zarrar is committed to telling stories that amplify historically marginalized communities. Next, we have Leena Minifie. Leena is a Vancouver-based film and television producer. Her work includes producing Bones of Crows, Lily Gladstone, Far Out There, and British Columbia and Untold History. An award-winning series producer, Leena has led impact campaigns for Indian Horse and the Grizzlies. She's also an alumna of the Reelworld Producer Program. And last but not least, we have Ryan Moccasin. Ryan is an author, satirist, and comedian from Saskatoon. He's president of the Feather Entertainment, Inc. and produces The Feather News, an online satirical show on APTN Lumi. His work has been featured on APTN, CTV, and CBC. He released a comedy album with Just for Laughs and performs at major US comedy festivals. So those are all 6 of our wonderful trailblazers. Welcome to all of you, and welcome to everyone who tuned in. So my first question, I think, is one that anyone who's aspiring in the industry, has just started in the industry, would be curious about. Everybody, before they get started in any kind of like creative job, has this fantasy or a vision of what their job would be. And the reality always kind of deviates from that. So I'm curious what the reality of your job and what your fantasy of your job starting out were. Ryan, I remember you, as a comedian, I don't think you expected to be doing so much grant writing. So yeah, how does the reality deviate from what you expected?
It deviated a lot, actually. Because my background is comedy writing, writing first and foremost, and performing stand-up comedy. So I never pictured I would be, doing budgets and grants for as a producer for my own production company here in Saskatchewan. But it all lines up, like, that trajectory is still, on the way, on the up and up. And so it all lines up in the end, even though that you find yourself learning more and like doing other things in this industry that kind of like pose you towards that different lane, but it's towards the same goal. So you have that like clarity of vision where you're going, but it's flexible how you're getting there. And I'm grateful for everything I'm learning, like running my own production company, the people I meet as a producer, like working with writers, actors, showrunners, and everything like that. And so, yeah, it's just quite different from what I envisioned it, but the vision is still there no matter how crazy it gets. So, yeah.
Does anyone else have something unexpected that they hadn't realized would be a part of their day-to-day?
I guess I'll add, there's a lot of therapy as well involved, right? Like I think especially when you're show running or when you're leading a group of people, there's a lot of just taking care of the people around you, right? And I think that's another thing that you don't think. You think, oh, if I do the job, for me, I grew up wanting to be a performer, being an actor, and those things. And then I got into writing. But as writing, you think, oh, I'm literally just writing things. But as a showrunner, it really, for you to get the best performances and the best work out of people, you have to make sure that they're feeling like they're in a good place. And a lot of times that's down to you to make sure that the people feel like they're in a comfortable enough place to create really good art. So that's part of it that I think a lot of people don't think about.
Mm-hmm.
I would add so much politicking as well to that, like the navigation of so many different types of stakeholders, people that if from working with actors to working with anybody to how you're selling your project, how you're finding ways to communicate what your vision is, but you might have to, angle it a certain way for a certain audience or for a certain stakeholder. And so that massaging and navigating, but also staying true to what you're trying to say and what your vision is. But there is some massaging of one's message in order to get to the green light.
Go ahead.
I was going to say facilitation skills for sure on top of that. And also knowledge translation skills when you're coming from another culture or community and you're dealing with a lot of like non-Indigenous people in my case. I'm constantly doing knowledge translation and trying to figure out ways of thinking and how this is Indigenous and how that can transfer in sort of non-Indigenous world, which is, it's a whole ball of wax. So.
For me, it was like realizing that as a writer-director who predominantly works in film, that like you were spending so little time on set. Like in a good year, I would be on set for like 20 to 25 days. And then for the other 11 months, it's like, that's actually the job. And when you're on set is the bonus, like everything is paid off. But the real job is those months of politicking and development and raising funds. And how do you keep your skills fresh when you're not on set? Because when you get on set, everyone else there, especially below the line crew, like they live on set. That's their home. And what it means to be often the person who spends the least time on set leading the ship.
Right.
For me, it's really navigating institutions. I didn't anticipate that I would have to do so much of that just to be able to tell the stories that matter. And that to me was the biggest surprise, is how much I've had to navigate producers and editors and all of that, just to be able to tell a story. Biggest surprise of my life.
Leena, I like that you brought up the skill of knowledge translation, because I remember you mentioning to me earlier that you actually stepped back from the industry because you felt like you weren't going to have that opportunity to be able to share stories about your community, and people weren't willing to listen to the way you wanted to package and share stories. So could you talk a bit about that, and then what made you want to then come back and feel like you could?
I think Omayra knows a little bit of the story, but I was a journalist. Actually, I started off after film school. The easiest method for telling stories, because it was impossible in the 1999, 2000, 2001 to get stories made outside of our amazing APTN. But I was a journalist, and those stories were not accepted back at that time. Like talking about residential school survivors, talking about the atrocities, talking about what we've been through as a people who've been through cultural and genocide here in Canada. So there was a point when I just stepped back and went back to school because nobody was ready for my slate, and nobody was really taking pitches in this different way and looking at our communities in different ways, especially genre right now. I am so excited for those folks on here who get to actually tell what they want to do in the method, in the genre that they want to do right now. Everything's, the gates are open now. So, and everybody's making phenomenal work here. It's great to be in this group.
And that's, I think, sort of brings me to a question about trailblazing in general. I mean, the reason you're all here is because you all have sort of created your own trail and figured out your own path, which is not easy to do in an industry that's not set up for you, and you don't necessarily have, in many cases, you might be the first person doing what you've set out to do. So there isn't a blueprint or anything to follow. So what would you share with anyone who's sort of trying to figure their own way out in this industry and maybe do things in their own way?
I have, I'll start. It's just, exactly as you said, being an Indigenous person, this is a very like colonial structure we're working in the TV and film industry, just like the legal frameworks and like the financials and like everything like that. And at times it just seems like this, you work in a system that's not meant for you. But you can overcome that. Like what I did is seeking out those valuable mentorships. When I started producing, like I was just thrown into the fray, like thrown into the water and swim. But I also had these mentors from the National Screen Institute. I took part in the producers lab from there. Jason Brennan and I forget her name. I'll come up with I'll remember her name later on. But there was like two mentors who walked us through the production process, and because I've come from a creative background, so learning about the operations of a TV or web series set, like how the production runs, was very helpful to me. And just like navigating, like talking with your lawyer about. Am I still on?
Yes, you are.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. I just saw the little loading screen on my end here. But just like seeking out those mentorships and just realizing that even though this is a very different system we're working within, we're smart enough, we're brave enough to figure this out, just keep pressing on, find those mentorships. And like Anthony said, lots of therapy, that's what gets you through here. So that's my thoughts on that.
To add on, I would say, like, I don't know if anybody else in this panel, but like, I don't know if we set out to be trailblazers. Like, we mostly just set out to tell the stories that we were interested in telling, and then finding out that we're doing something that goes against the grain. So I would say, try your best to tell the stories that you are invested in telling, and your audience will find you. For me, like Within Flames, it's a Pakistani Canadian film. And we didn't know where we would discover our audience. And then we had our widest theatrical release in the United Kingdom. So I think, especially in the era that we're living in now, and how movies from across the world can be seen across the world, in some ways there's a democratization for audiences. Audience will find you if you're telling stories honestly and with integrity. And I guess practice.
Go ahead.
It's a funny question, and I'm trying to think back to like what was going on in the earlier times. But I think when, like for me specifically, when like the prejudice of who you are is an obedient Asian girl who's going to be quiet and not ruffle any feathers. And if anyone has met me for longer than 5 minutes, that's definitely not my personality. That when in some of the original, like first jobs that I did, I think that went against the grain of what people wanted me to be or act. And I was really passionate about making films. I was really passionate about working with great artists, and, you know, to go into every opportunity with respect and integrity for myself and for other people. But then when I saw what people were kind of projecting onto me, and I was like, oh, okay, no, this is not the system that I'm going to be following. I'm going to try to do this on my own. I'm going to start my own company. I'm going to follow the path that makes sense to me. And that's why I was wearing multiple hats. But at the end of the day, I always wanted to be a writer and director specifically. So I'm very happy that I got to end up there. But I think it was just going, oh, that system's not built for us, and the system is not respecting who I am, and I don't fit into that. So you kind of have to figure out how to do it in the way that makes the most sense to you.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was on this call, but someone last week was saying, if you're waiting for someone to give you that green light to do your first project or your first film, it's just never going to happen. You just got to do it yourself. Leena or Omayra, Anthony, anything you want to add about figuring out your own way in this industry?
I remember in 2020 when I was covering the Black Lives Matter movement in Saskatchewan. I was the only Black journalist at the time, and it was taking a huge toll. And as I was covering the story, I was realizing that a lot of the audience members weren't really understanding what was going on beyond the headlines. And so people were seeing thousands of people on the streets, but kind of had a complete disconnect with why that was. And I remember wondering, why are people so disconnected from what is happening? And so I realized that there was actually a vacuum in understanding history in the communities that a lot of the protesters were living in, and having a collective understanding of what was happening. And so I had to just stop a moment and have a deep conversation with myself about what reporting and being a journalist in that moment meant for me and for people who looked like me in the communities that I was part of. And so that's how I started thinking, okay, well, we have to tell stories beyond just the headlines. But in that moment, the organization that I was part of, where we ended up telling these stories, certainly had no concept of what that meant. And so we had this concept of Black on the prairies, but it was like, okay, well, go ahead. Not because we fundamentally understand what you're trying to say, but because we kind of think that there is a case for telling these stories. So that to me was a bit of a surprise. And that's what really allowed me to survive that moment, and then to be able to have that moment of genius, or at least that moment of clarity and difference, was by calling storytellers in the region that I was in, Black storytellers, and say, hey, something is happening here that people are not capturing and are not necessarily integrating. And so how do we go beyond just the headline and tell a larger story that incorporates history and large scale storytelling?
Mm-hmm. Ryan, you had brought up mentorship earlier, and I think everybody on this call has a different experience and different feelings about mentorship. I know, Zarrar, at some point you had said that you look for mentors very intentionally, for specific projects where it's someone who can specifically guide you through a type of project. But I know everybody has their own thoughts. Maybe we can start with Zarrar when it comes to mentorship, but I would like to hear from the group, because we hear so much about mentorship programs in the industry and finding the right mentors for you. I'm just curious whether that is something all of you think about or did think about at some point.
Yeah, I mean, mentorship has been everything for me because I didn't come from a film background. So I attended a lot of these labs where you were partnered up with filmmakers, and now I'm doing the same thing where I'm mentoring young filmmakers. And it's always been looking for someone who's accomplished the task that I hope to accomplish and isn't too much ahead of me. Also, because that way they have like the memory kind of fresh of what they just did. So, you know, if it was to play at a festival like Cannes, I would look for mentors who've played at like Cannes, Venice, or Berlin and ask them about their journey of getting that film made. Or when I was working on In Flames, it's from the Talent Fund, Telefilm's micro-budget film program. It was meeting with a lot of filmmakers who'd already been through that program and hearing about the challenges that they faced. And that really helped prepare me if, you know, embarking on my own feature, because now I kind of knew, okay, well, this is going to happen at this stage. This is going to happen at that stage. So it's always, I guess, looking for mentors who are like a few steps ahead, but not too far ahead, and trying to have that conversation be one that's both ways, because mentorship isn't also just like a top-down situation. I found that older filmmakers are always looking to, you know, we're an industry that's also deeply ageist. So older filmmakers are looking for younger filmmakers to have a pulse on the industry, and younger filmmakers are looking at older filmmakers to be like, how did you do that? So I hope mentorship continues in all of its facets, especially for the BIPOC community.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just jump in real quick and say that for me, when I was looking for mentors, when I was looking for things, I actually didn't know what I was looking for in mentors, but I was looking for people who were successful at what they did. So I would check in with them, ask them questions, figure out how they got to where they are, and a lot of times I would use those transferable skills to get where I want to get to. And I think it's important to kind of like glean from someone like the hustle or the know-how, the knowledge, whatever it is that took them to get where they are, and then figure out, okay, where do I want to go, and how can I use these lessons to get where I'm trying to get.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
I would just agree with Zarrar that like it's finding some, for me anyway, it's been I've been very lucky with people that have mentored me, and specifically with Jean-Marc Farrell. Him and I were together for a very long time, and so he was also someone who I spent so much time learning from. And but I think one of the most important things is finding someone who is also passionate about the same things you're passionate about, and passionate about you and your career, and to see you succeed. Because I find when it's been like a very organized, when I've been part of more organized mentorship programs, if the mentor that I'm put with or whatever is not that interested in my types of films or my types of storytelling, it's not really going to get me very far, because they're not as invested in me as I would hope for them to be. But also it's like, if you want to become better at talking to actors on set, then you talk to a director who is really good at doing that and being specific about that. Or if you want to become better in the cutting room, you know, go and hang out with a great editor that you love, or see if you can assist in some kind of way. But that's been the helpful thing for me, is like, this is the thing that I wanted, a skill that I want to be able to get better at, and this person is really good at that, and they'll have knowledge to share with me on that front.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll also add to that too, like my mentorship journey. Lori Lazinski was the one that came to mind. Jason Brennan, Lori Lazinski from the Producers Lab 2-3 years ago now. And I was also part of another National Screen Institute program last year, and actually one of the presenters or mentors in that program was actually Anthony Q. Farrell was there, and he was walking us through show running. And I would suggest, like, anybody who's starting this journey, just to sit down and write your own learning path, you know, like that journey on what you want to learn towards to, and also how you learn, because we also learn in different ways. Like myself, I learn by like hands-on. I have to do it, because if I sit in the classroom and you tell me all this stuff, like it's just going to go in one ear and out the other. I just have to like see how it's practically done. And that's what Anthony did with us. I remember, Anthony, we actually wrote like an episode outline for like a fake TV show or something like that. And that was just to show us the process of show running. and like how you generate those ideas and get that from like idea to script, and like how that plays out in the production. And I also, and in that same program, we sat down with Ins Choi, the creator of Kim's Convenience, and he did the same thing too. It was all over Zoom, put together by the NSI. We created this fake dentist sitcom. You know, it was just like something silly, and you know, we just created the characters, created the story world, and that was part of my learning path too, because I wanted to know how these top creators made their shows, and they just like put it all out for us, and really was really hands-on. This actually was very generous with their knowledge and how they wrote the scripts and stuff like that, and it was just super valuable to someone like me who just needs to do things rather than just sit in the classroom and just like read about it, you know. So yeah, that was just wanted to add that about mentorships. Just understand how you learn and create that learning path towards where you want to go.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I wanted to step in. I want to also say that there's different methodologies and sort of practices that people bring. So, you know, I worked with producers who are amazing, like ninja producers, but like maybe their set's more military style. And then there's, you know, people who are quite soft and use soft power and are more like Zen. So, you know, compared to like a martial arts practice, I guess you want to go with the person if you're wanting to learn jiu-jitsu or capoeira, taekwondo. You want to kind of pick your style as well, but you can learn a lot from people who have a different style than you, because you can learn about what you don't want to do, I think, which is really important, or how you want to sort of take these skills and combine it for your own flavor of producing and being a creative. So
And Anthony, for you, I mean, having been a writer in a writer's room and then being a showrunner, I mean, there must have been so much as a writer that you learned that you then brought to when you were running a writer's room or a show yourself.
Yeah, yes, definitely. And I've been very lucky to have great showrunners I've learned from, like Greg Daniels, Jason Belbin, Dan Can at Little Mosque, Dan and Dave Hogue, Dan Cross and Dave Hogue at Thunder Music. There's a lot of people that I've worked with that I've learned a lot of things from, but I always tell showrunners, like, some of the best lessons I learned being a good showrunner, I also learned from being a supervisor at Canada's Wonderland and at the music park. Like, for real, like as a 21-year-old who's responsible for 18, 17, 19-year-olds, you learn so much about personalities and how to supervise and how to give people tasks and how to communicate. That all that stuff's important. And I learned a lot of that, not even just from being in a writer's room, but also from just like the world and living life and working in offices. I only got my job writing on The Office because I had worked in so many offices before getting the chance to actually write on a show like that, right? So don't be afraid to use like non-film industry work to help get yourself not only in the door, but also help yourself succeed once you get in the door. So, but definitely being in a writer's room is a big part of it, but for show running, it's so much more than just the writer's room. It is all the development stuff that leads up to the writer's room, and then after the writer's room, all the stuff that goes on set and then in post, and it's a big old thing, and it's one of those things where you have to be in it to learn it, but that's one of the reasons also why I do that showrunner boot camp, because I feel like if you have a solid base, it'll help you when you have your first show to at least know what the job is, so that when you get there, it's easier for you to succeed.
Right. And I think what I'm kind of getting from this conversation is like, yes, you can learn a lot from mentors and people who are a bit ahead of you in the industry, but you can also learn a lot from your peers and people that are just working maybe in different levels or like different fields of the industry. And related to that, I had a question for Omayra, because I know Blacks on the Prairies, you co-created and co-produced with someone. So I'd love to hear about that collaborative process of creating the show.
Yes, my co-creator and co-producer is Ifichu Telu, who is the host of Now or Never on CBC. And shout out to Ifi, of course, always. That collaboration was so essential because we really were coming from two different perspectives. And that was kind of the beauty of the entire project, is to truly deconstruct this idea that Blackness on the Prairies is a monolith, which sounds ridiculous to say, but ultimately very much the reality that a lot of people had in their mind. And so having if he thinks of storytelling differently than I do. And so we were always bouncing ideas off of each other and challenging each other as we were conceptualizing the editorial line, as we were also inviting other creatives into the project. I mean, one of the incredible things, and this is what in many ways I try to think about, is how to tell stories in community. I don't really believe that stories are told kind of outside of community and in silos. And an essential thing that Ify and I worked on is bringing in an advisory board, a community advisory board, because we knew that telling the stories of 200 years of Black presence on the Canadian prairies and kind of really reformulating Canada's history from that perspective, we couldn't do it alone, just the two of us and the people that we were inviting in. We had to get elders, we had to get archivists, we had to get researchers, all Black, of course, on the prairies, to really keep us in check as well and challenge us and keep us pushing. And that was a form of collective mentorship. I learned a lot from my co-creator and co-producer Ify Chiwetelu, and then also ended up learning so much from the elders, the Black elders and knowledge keepers that we invited into the project. And it was always kind of an ongoing conversation, which continues to this day,
Absolutely. Zarrar, for you, In Flames was your debut feature film, right? So who were the key collaborators that you relied on through this process and the process of like writing and developing this film all the way to showing it at Cannes and doing the festival circuit?
So I made a short version of the film before making the feature, and I started just a really fantastic relationship with the two actresses who were in that short, one of which ended up also playing the same role in the feature, and the other one couldn't, but was also really a huge part of the developmental process.
Mm-hmm.
And then our line producer, my core producer, the lead producer, there was our director of photography. Like there was a lot of women on the project, both behind the camera and in front of the camera.
Mm-hmm.
And that ended up really informing the writing process, because it was, coming from the lives of all of this diversity of women who are of different ages, different income brackets, different socioeconomic realities, and how they navigate life in Pakistan, and what it means to them to be a mother, a daughter, a professional, what all of those different roles that they have in the society, how it impacts the way that they're able to exist in the society. So it was really intentional for us to have a director of photography who felt like they were from that community, and having a female eye behind this camera about a movie that we're telling about the patriarchy. Because ultimately for me, the director's job is kind of like coaching everyone, but the lens into the world is really the DP. So, we searched high and low for a cinematographer who was comfortable coming to Pakistan during the pandemic to work on a low budget movie. And we found this incredible DP, Egil Nurbulatova from Kazakhstan, who I was in the Asian Film Academy with, who came on the journey with us. So it was really knowing that, we're working with a subject matter that was really live, and wanting to ensure that we treated it with the respect that it needed.
Wow. Does anyone else have any stories of collaborators that they've worked with over the years, maybe on a specific project, or someone who's become like a longtime collaborator that you want to share? Brian?
Yeah, I'll chime in here. That's been a big part of my journey. Actually, the biggest part of my journey is finding that creative team that core team that you're comfortable with. That's what really helped me out. Because one of our main projects is the Feather News. It's a web series that's on APTN Lumi. And that started off just as, just a simple comedy blog, like The Onion, just a fake news website with an Indigenous slant. And so yeah, I started that in 2018, just as just like a fun little summer project, and then it kind of grew after I met these comedians who collaborated with me on the scene, some stand-up comedians, Danny Knight and Sean Cuthand, who I approached after a few months of starting the project to say, hey, I want to do a video component, like fake video monologues, because they're awesome performers and writers. And they said yes, and they became part of my key creative talent, like for today. Even like we're just finished wrapping up season 2 for the Feather News and APTN, like 6 years ago. I never dreamed of where this little project would go, and it's still growing every season. Like every bit by bit, we keep adding those amazing people to help us. But it all started with just reaching out and finding a creative team that you're comfortable working with. So there's those two, and we added a third one a year later after that, named Musquilla, who does our editing and also our writing. So us four make up the 4 core people of this project, and we rely on each other, for joke writing, even mentorships, or even like we live in the same city. It's like personal thing. Hey, can you give me a ride or something like that? It's like almost like we're like a support group for each other in all aspects of life. And so it's just really cool having them along with me on this ride. So we're just going to be collaborators for life, us 4 Indigenous people. And so yeah, I'm just really thankful for that. And I thought I'd just throw that out there. So.
That's great.
I also kind of want to jump in, just exactly what Ryan was just saying just now. Like, one of the reasons I feel like that helped me get to where I am today is when I was coming up, I found a bunch of people that were kind of at the same level as me, who wanted the same things. Like they were hungry, like I was, and we worked together to get to the next levels. And I think if you find your group of people who are hungry like you, who have the same comedy or the same drama, whatever it is, you find your group and you grow together. And I think that's a kind of collaboration I think that everyone can use to kind of help themselves get to, like, a lot of like writers coming up, directors going to be like, how do I get to the next thing? Like, find the people who are in your group and just kind of like just build together, help each other, lift each other up. And I think that's another way that collaboration can help you become not only a better artist, but also become a more successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Same thing, like you can find mentors and all of and everything like that, but at the end of the day, it's probably the people that are on the same level that you are, that are in the same place, that have the same dreams and same experience, like not necessarily the same experiences, but like that are you're going through this thing together. Then they're the ones that you're going to hold each other up and to lean on and to be, when I think of all the filmmakers and artists that are part of my artist community that are completely my support network, and and we're sharing, we're helping, and we're making phone calls for each other because we want to see we want to see each other succeed, and I'm so happy I get to see all my friends' films in these beautiful film festivals now and watch their shows on television, and I'm so happy for them. And same thing within community. It's not just being part of the film community, but part of like the Asian community, part of like the international, like Chinese community and stuff like this, that we want to see our stories being told. And so we're also invested in like getting to that next level as well for other storytellers. And they can be from all sorts of different backgrounds or different career paths, but they'll want, there's people that want to help you and want to see you succeed. And so it's community and the collaboration within that framework.
And well, I see the No Ordinary Man poster behind you, and that you co-directed that film, right? That was a close collaboration where you worked on this project. With the co-director. Anything you want to share about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I also warned you about my dog. He has just arrived. I don't know how this camera works. Anyway, I'm just going to give him a treat while shut him up, because sometimes you have to collaborate with your canine friends with some beef jerky. Yeah, I mean, that was a great collaboration. First, that started off with the producer of the film, Sarah Spring, is one of my very closest friends. So I knew the project through so that's how I found out about the project. And then she asked me to come on board with it. And as someone who's not a trans person, I obviously can't make this film about a trans jazz musician without working with a co-director with a trans person, with Chase Joint, who's an amazing trans masculine filmmaker, and co-wrote it with Amos Mack, who's an incredibly talented transmasculine TV writer based in LA. And we called ourselves the Billy Tipton Trio because that's who the film was about. And he had a band called the Billy Tipton Trio. And our shared skill set, we were all reaching for the same film, and our different skills that we brought to the table. Like I was able to bring an outside perspective to kind of zoom out a little bit. So it would be a film that could speak to other communities, but also, maybe at that point, a little bit of the craft side of things that I edited the film as well. But we worked so incredibly well together. Like Chase is a one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. And we just taught each other along the way. Like I was starting at a place that like they had to like handhold me for the first part of development as like not having lived a trans experience. And then, then was able to flourish. And we were this little trio that made this film together.
That's amazing. And that's actually something, just looking at your filmography, Aisling, that I noticed. You've told so many different kinds of stories. So far, you haven't really focused on telling stories about Asian characters or Asian stories specifically. And I'd love to ask like everybody on the call, like, of course, we're the best people to tell our own stories, but we also know what happens where people of color get pigeonholed, and there's this expectation that you can only tell one kind of story. You can only tell stories about your community, or you're not really capable of telling stories beyond that. And Aisling, you've really pushed against that. So maybe we can start with you, but I'd love to hear everybody else's perspectives on that as well.
Well, I mean, it's I don't know if maybe I didn't push against it because right now all the stories that I'm telling or in development I'm trying to tell are all Asian stories. So I think it's like I needed to get to a place where somebody was going to allow me to tell a story that involved my own community. And of course, there is more there over the last 5 years. There's been more interest in Asian storytelling because I've had stuff in development that I have like, I had a TV pilot that, that had a great response to it, but it was about a divorced Chinese Canadian woman who was divorcing her white husband. I'm a mixed race person too, and my parents are still together, but it was a comedy about this divorced Chinese woman. And I talked to a very well-meaning exec about it, and they were like, "Oh, we really loved it, but we already have Kim's Convenience on air," and it's like, that's not the same story, but it was. So when there's little space, like if I had, anyway, you get what I'm trying to say here. But I feel deeply connected to all the projects that I have been a part of because my experience is intersectional with many things. I'm a woman. My parents are immigrants. My dad's from Jamaica. He's Chinese. My mom's from Ireland. I grew up in Nova Scotia. Like, there's a lot of different access points to different types of stories. And also, if I only told stories about that experience, and I hope I get to, but if I only told a story about that experience, it would have been a harder sell and earlier in my career, 15, 20 years ago. And hopefully that's not the case now. But yeah, I mean, I feel deeply passionate about telling stories that reflect the experience that I have in this world and the experience of international Asian community. So my projects moving forward, many of them, I hope for the next 10 years, those are the only stories that I'm telling, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, but do you feel like people are more receptive now towards stories that are more diverse than from earlier in your career? Because I'm just starting out, so I'm like, oh, hasn't it always been like this?
Oh, no, yeah, no, it hasn't. There's, when like seeing Michelle Yeoh winning an Oscar made a difference. Watching Beef on Netflix made a huge difference. Kim's Convenience made a difference. Seeing Simu as Shang-Chi makes a difference. So all of those things, it's just all the doubt that everyone has had that your stories are so niche and they're never going to be, no one in the general audience is going to like it. And first off, it's like, I'm sorry, but like Asians, we take up a big part of the audience. So FYI, even if it was niche, that's a pretty big corner. But now, since there is more household names and more of an acceptance, and also like you can't ignore the international Asian market right now. Like you can't say we don't want to make movies that anyone's going to watch in Korea and India and China. Like that's well, China's a whole other kettle of fish, but like what I mean. But it's still a struggle. You're still considered niche in a lot of ways, but I think it's a lot better than it was, I mean, it's definitely a lot better than it was 15, 20 years ago.
I think people are actually saying now they want these unique stories that are from different places, and they know the market. I think the internet has a lot to do with it. I'm just going to say this. There was a long time where people didn't know that there was other people in the world, and the internet has really exposed you to be like, oh, 85% of the world doesn't look like me and is diverse and is brown. Like that has blown people's minds. Of course, it set up a backlash in a lot of ways because people panicked. But I think that right now is the only way in the future is by telling these unique, authentic stories that have universal appeal. And like that's what I'm hearing now. And I've never heard this before. So it's a hope for a lot of those people watching right now.
Yeah, I would also like to add to that too. When it comes to like being pigeonholed into just telling this one genre of story, as an Indigenous storyteller as well, people just want, well, let's hear these Indigenous stories from you. It's like, okay, kind of thing. And like that old adage is like write what you know. It's basically what they're telling you. Write what you know about being Indigenous. I kind of push back from that. I'd rather write what interests me. So that's and another thing too. Like we live in an age where I look at the model we did like for the Feather News. Like if I was to pitch that right away to networks like APTN or like CBC or anything like that, right away they'd say, no, we don't want that. But I think like nowadays we had like the infrastructure, we had the like technology is accessible now where we could go out there and just made our own YouTube videos. And then so what you do is you create demand. You show that these networks and these broadcasters that there's already demand for this. People want to see this. Are you into this? And they were like, APTN was like, yeah, sure, because we had an audience that was following us. So that's what I would just say, like if you're telling a story that's unique and you don't think like the broadcasters or the gatekeepers are going to say yes, I advise you just to go out there and make it. Like the money will come, the grants will come, the broadcast will come knocking if you just go out there and make it on YouTube and stuff like that. And don't worry about the gatekeepers, they'll come knocking one day, and it's a good feeling when they do. So,
yeah. Does anyone else have anything to add to that, potential dilemma of like, I want to tell these stories that maybe reflect different communities that I belong to, but that I don't want to be, pigeonholed into telling one particular type of story?
I'll just add, when I started out as a journalist in Canada, I've had to tell all different kinds of stories, in fact, just to learn the craft of journalism and the craft of storytelling. And then at some point I realized there's a lot of stories that affect communities that I'm part of that nobody else was telling. And so I had to kind of like shift a little bit and say, well, I can report on whatever major story is breaking in this country or the corner of the country that I was part of. But there's also a whole tradition of storytelling that I come from and a whole reality that I come from. And those stories deserve to be told. And so I remember particularly moments where it was like, well, Omayra, you can cover this Black story or whatever. And it was like, I would happily do that because, in fact, I realized that around me, a lot of the journalists weren't able to tell those stories with authenticity. And so today, it is a great honor and pleasure, in fact, to be able to to tell these stories and to walk into a tradition and a specific perspective that is part of my history and reality and honors the communities that I am part of. And I don't see it as being pigeonholed. I see it as complementary to the foundation of storytelling that I am able to do alongside colleagues who are not Black, for instance, or African, and don't come from the intersectionalities. So I see the foundation is there, but then there's an incredible contribution that goes beyond that tradition.
Absolutely. Anthony, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to say the idea of new storytelling and pigeonhole or any of those things, I think, don't forget that your stories will resonate. They'll be relatable. And the more specific your story is, the more relatable it will be. Because I always tell people, like, no one sees himself as just a general kind of blob. Everyone sees himself as a specific individual. And they will connect more to something that is also specific. They're not going to connect to something that feels generalized. So dig into whatever story you're telling and be as specific as you want to be about it, and don't worry about, like, you'll find your audience because you're not alone.
Absolutely. I know we were talking about how, like, people are now hungry for diverse stories, but I was actually at a screening. It might have been the 20th or 25th anniversary screening of Saving Face. I don't know if you know the film. It's like this queer Chinese American rom-com. And so at the screening, they got the filmmaker Alice Wu to record a little message. And in that, she said that someone said to her, you know, if this movie had been made now, 20, 25 years later, there would have been a much bigger audience. Like, you would have blown up. And she was like, maybe, but it had such more of an impact because of the time that it came out in the 90s, when nobody was talking about, like, queer immigrant kids and how their parents are dealing with, you know, their kids coming out. And she's like, I wouldn't trade that. I might have a bigger audience now, but it reached the people that it needed to. So I think that goes back to what all of you are saying about your audience will find you and find the work that you're creating.
I'll also say, like, I remember that movie. I love that movie. And I think it took Alice Wu 20 years to get her second feature made.
Yes.
And that really speaks hugely about who gets a chance in this industry, how successful you have to be, how much harder you have to work if you don't look like who are the people that they want to support. That movie was huge. It played at Sundance. It had Will Smith as an executive producer. She should have gone on to do a huge movie right after that. And that did not happen. And I don't think the industry has changed that much, which is why creators like everyone in this are taking the reins to create themselves, because those chances aren't given, in my experience.
And just to add to that, like, the impact, like, you know, to what Alice is saying, is like the impact that film would have for a queer Chinese kid at that point is so important that, like, okay, you would have a bigger audience. It's like, yeah, but you make the film so that it reaches and touches people, and that it becomes something that they can carry forward in their own experience in life. And so that is the important. This is why we do it, you know, like, is to have those, to make those connections. And of course there should be a million more films just like that, but, you know, you have to start somewhere, you know. So that's I think, and, you know, when we were making Jeff Barnaby's Rhymes for Young Ghouls 10 years ago, you know, like, the questions that Jeff was getting asked when making that film, and what people have said about the film since his passing, it's like, you know, that was the movie that he needed to make at that point, and he had such a strong thing to say, and we wanted to help him, you know, myself and John Christo, the other producer, like, we were there to make sure that his vision was able to translate on screen, and you know, I think that I can't imagine the last 10 years without that movie being in existence, personally, you know. I mean, obviously I was attached to it, but
also the impact that movie. So my first job in the industry was working for an international distribution company that carried Rhymes for Young Ghouls. And like, I know so many Indigenous filmmakers and racialized filmmakers like myself who saw that film and were like, oh, this is possible. And this is possible in genre. And this is possible as a Canadian filmmaker to tell stories from our communities. So it expanded possibilities for creators. So I'm grateful that you created that movie. Thank you.
It's all Jeff. It was all Jeff.
So we have time for one question. There was a question about collaboration, but we already covered that. There's a question about worrying about being too niche in your writing, and if you kind of feel like you need to water down your humor or your style when you're thinking about writing for a wider audience. So I don't know who wants to take that.
I'll just go back to what I said before about the specificity of what you put out there. And I think people will connect to it because it's specific, because it's authentic. And so I never worry about being too niche, especially in comedy. Like, it's very subjective. So I don't think every joke that I put into a script is funny to every single person. If it's funny to one person, then it worked. If it's funny to a bunch of people, then hey, we're celebrating, right? So for me, it's really about like, if it's niche, then you might think it's niche, but then you put it out there and you find out, oh, there's a bunch of other people who think weird like I do. And then now you have a bunch of new friends.
Does anyone else have thoughts on that?
I would say I'll go the opposite. I'm like, yes, water down your humor. Try to please everybody. No, yeah. No, try to please everybody. That's always going to be a moving target. So yeah, I would echo what Anthony was saying is, don't worry about being too niche, because weird as you want, that joke's not going to be for everybody. If it makes you laugh or makes anybody in the writer's room laugh, it'll resonate. So.
Leena, Aisling, Zarrar, Omayra, if anybody wants to add anything to that question, feel free. And it doesn't have to be about humor, of course. It can be about anything in terms of like a niche versus wide audience.
I mean, I echo Anthony and Ryan. I think the more specific your voice is, the more people who will reach out and find it. Like, there's such a crowded marketplace these days, and you need your story to set you apart. So specificity, I think, is the name of the game.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think that, if you conforming is not going to make a better a better film, a better show, a better story. So, it's not going to be for everyone, but that's fine. They don't have to watch your show. There's other things on TV.
I remember someone responding to a question about relatability where they were like, Baby Reindeer is the biggest show, and how many people can say they relate to that exact experience? Like, you don't have to relate to a character or to an experience to still be captivated by a show or a story.
You also can have a really big budget, though, and that makes it relatable. Just throw it to the granders out there. I mean, it's contemporary and pop culture. I mean, we get to be culture setters. I mean, that's the thing. Like, you can be authentic, you could be yourself, you can be all these things niche. But essentially, like, if you are making your work to be contemporary and you're driving it to be the best art you can be, I mean, that's what makes it have appeal. Is that commitment to the art and the fine art and the craft. So.
Mm-hmm. And sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ash.
No, I absolutely agree with that. And I was just going to add that, like, specificity is how we get to the universal, really. And I mean, it's really how does that character feel in that particular moment, in that particular context they're in, that's what allows your story to really shine and for people to connect with it. So embrace the weird, embrace the very granular, because that's truly how nuance comes out, and the truth of your character and the story that you're trying to tell will be reflected and people will connect to it.
Mm-hmm. I was going to add something a little cheeky and maybe controversial that, like, we have been kept out of the system for so long. I need to learn my language. I can only learn English again. that, you know, there's nothing wrong with a little like cultural gatekeeping yourself, where it's like, oh, this isn't for you because you don't get it because you never grew up with that type of parent or this type of, you know, experience or that type of food. I don't know. Guess it's not for you, you know? So I that's where, and of course, like the more specific that it becomes more universal if the, you know, the human condition, humanity is a relatable experience and we are, you know, we are multitudes. But I do think that, you know, I had this conversation about beef because there are some people that I deeply loved this show. And I know a lot of people, and they weren't Asian, deeply hated the show and found everyone despicable in it. And I was like, that's because you don't know what the rage is. You know, you're not experiencing the rage. And that's okay, because that's your experience. But like, this show's for us who are real mad. Anyway, just to add that, we can gatekeep too.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, Jet, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Zarrar.
I was just going to say, like, it's also, while we're telling our stories authentically, like, one of my favorite things about cinema and experiencing stories is learning about other cultures and getting to travel through the story and learning about a people or a country I've never been to. So that's where that specificity is advantageous, because people, if you feel like you've seen that story 1,000 times told that way, you're less inclined to really carry that with you. So yeah, it's a win-win.
I agree. And that's the point of art, right? Like, to get to experience different perspectives. Okay, well, we're right on time. So thank you all for being here, for participating in this conversation. And congratulations once again to being this year's Reelworld Trailblazers. It's very well deserved, each and every one of you. So thank you. Thank you for your work.
Thank you, Reelworld.
Thank you, Reelworld.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
We love Reelworld.
World's the best for sure.
Yes.
Thank you.